Welcome to Final Fantasy XIV Mythbusters, where we put the various claims and myths about the game to the test to see what is true, what is false, and why. For this special episode, the format will be a bit different, instead presented as a quiz so you can play along on your own knowledge as well. And we'll focus on highlighting some of the classic myths and misunderstandings that come up time and again, meaning that I might already have covered the topic before, so you have a better chance. Of course, the explanation and the correct answer is still included. And be sure to leave a comment with how well you did, or a myth or a claim you met, if you have any. Number 1. How exactly does Provoke work? It matches your enmity to the highest enmity player and A. That's all it does. B. Makes you generate additional enmity for a few seconds. C. Additionally, instantly generates a lot of enmity. Or D. Forces the enemy to attack you for a few seconds. The correct answer is of course C. Provoke first matches your enmity to whoever currently has the most, and then, relatively speaking, generates a huge amount of enmity on top to make sure the enemy doesn't immediately swap back after being provoked. A is related to the fact that back in the day, Provoke actually only generated enough enmity that you would get attention, but at the very least since Shadowbringers, Provoke has had the effect it has now, with the main change over the years being that Provoke seemingly has had its enmity generation increased more and more to make sure the enemy sticks for at least a few seconds. D is a common misunderstanding caused by players coming from other games, notably World of Warcraft, where taunts, in addition to matching threat to the highest player, applies a debuff that forces the target to attack the taunting player. Regarding B then, for specific versions of WoW, this debuff also makes the player generate way more threat towards that specific target, incentivizing the user to have a strong attack lined up to use right after taunting to properly establish aggro. Number 2. Skill and spell speed increases the damage or healing of some GCDs, also known as abilities. True or false? True. To begin, in Final Fantasy XIV, skill and spell speed, instead of making damage over time effects take faster as one might expect, actually just increases the damage of the dot ticks, or healing of the hot ticks, with skill speed increasing the damage of weapon skill based dots and spell speed increasing the damage of spell based dots, and additionally increasing the healing from all healing over time effects. This description sort of leaves abilities out of the picture as they're not defined as either of those types. However, as it turns out, ability-based dots also benefit from speed in the same way. However, a rare misconception is the suggestion that skill speed applies to physical ability-based dots, while spell speed applies to magical ability-based dots. In truth, it seems like skill speed does appear to affect ability-based dots from physical jobs, while spell speed affects ability-based dots from magical jobs. Additionally, all ability-based healing over time is affected specifically by spell speed. This can of course be demonstrated by testing the damage or healing of an GCD and then adding a bunch of speed to your equipment, and then testing again. The amount of ability-based dots is rather limited though. For physical jobs, we have Paladin's Circle of Scorn, Gunbreaker's Battleshock, Machinist's Flamethrower, yes really, and for the weirder ones, Dark Knight's Salted Earth and Ninja's Doton, both being magical but situated on physical jobs. For magical jobs, we have Scholar's Baneful Impaction alongside various Blue Mage options. And just for completeness sake, there are some healing over time effects scaling with spell speed not on a job that would want spell speed normally. Gunbreaker's Aurora, Paladin's Holy Sheltron, Warrior's Equilibrium, and Damnation. Additionally, effects that heal once at a specific time, like Excogitation from Scholar, also count as healing over time, meaning Gunbreaker's Heart of Corundum and Dark Knight's Shadowed Vigil would also benefit. For DPS, we have Dancer's Improvisation, Monk's Riddle of Earth, Reaper's Arcane Crest, and Samurai's Tengetsu. However, for anyone thinking of doing something crazy with this discovery, the damage and healing bonus for dots and hots provided by speed is distinctly less than what Determination gives. So if that's what you want, maybe just stack some more Determination. That's also why in any of the demonstrations I showed here, the difference is so small that even with all of my testing, I'm actually not 100% certain how impactful it actually is. Number 3. Sprint generates limit break gauge. True or false? False. Limit break gauge is gradually generated passively over time, even if you're doing nothing. There are many ways to actively generate limit break gauge in a fight though. The 3 most common ones are doing particular boss mechanics that specifically give limit break gauge. For instance, soaking the things in the Cloud of Darkness fight. Being healed from extremely low HP also actively generates LB. Surviving otherwise lethal damage, which means if the damage the enemy is about to deal you is more than your actual HP and you live, also generates LB. All active LB generation methods have a distinct sound effect. The suggestion that sprint generates LB tends to come from misinterpreting the limit break gauge going up incidentally at the same time that sprint is pressed as the gauge being produced by sprint. A way to test the theory of sprint generating limit break is to round up a party large enough to provide an LB gauge, then find a striking dummy and enter combat with it. Start a timer and simply wait. When LB1 is reached, stop the timer. Then reset the LB gauge and test again while everyone is using sprint as often as they can. If LB1 is reached significantly sooner than before, with the only change being that sprint is being used, then sprint would be generating limit break. However, if the time is roughly the same, then sprint does not affect it. Number 4. Temperance increases the healing of Tetragrammaton. True or false? False. There are 2 different types of healing increasing effects. One is increase HP recovery via healing actions, which increases healing received from nearly all sources. The other is increases healing magic potency. This version is the one Temperance has, and it only increases healing done by spells, meaning that Temperance would increase the healing from, say, Afflatus Solace or Cure 2, but not Tetragrammaton. Number 5. Wildfire cannot critical hit or direct hit. True or false? True. Strangely, despite Wildfire being a single hit of perfectly ordinary potency damage, it is not able to crit or direct hit in any way. The reason for this is probably based on history, as before Shadowbringers, Wildfire worked differently. It still lasted 10 seconds, but instead of its current effect, it accumulated a percentage of most damage you did, and then exploded for exactly that amount of damage again. If Wildfire could crit or direct hit with that effect, it would mean that it double dipped on these stats, as it would then be able to accumulate a percentage of damage entirely based off crits and direct hits, and then pop for that damage as a crit direct hit for even more damage, which is maybe a bit crazy. Number 6. 1.5 second GCD actions are unaffected by attack speed slows and otherwise speed changes. True or false? True. This one is a bit of an oddly deep cut, as actions such as Blazing Shot, Emerald Rite, and Void Reaping are unaffected by attack speed changes simply because their GCDs are fixed, practically speaking. They are not set as some percentage of the normal GCD, unlike, for example, Monk's Six-Sided Star or Viper's Vicewinder. This specific interaction, or lack thereof, can be useful in situations where you are attack speed slowed. For example, holding gauge for a hypercharge window on, I don't know, the Odin fight could be handy in case you get attack speed slowed. Use hypercharge and just ignore that problem for the majority of the duration. Number 7. Do pets benefit from personal, single target, damage buffs? Additionally, do pets snapshot buffs on summon? A. Pets don't benefit from personal buffs, and they scale real time with the buffs they do benefit from. B. Pets do benefit from personal buffs, and they scale real time with buffs. C. Pets don't benefit from personal buffs, and they snapshot the buffs you have they would benefit from when they are summoned. Or D. Pets do benefit from personal buffs, and they snapshot the buffs you have they would benefit from when they are summoned. The correct answer is B. A somewhat simple way to test this is with Dark Knight's Living Shadow and gem drafts. First, use Living Shadow as is to get a baseline. Then, use Gem Draft, then Living Shadow to see the impact of the Gem Draft. At this point, we've demonstrated the first part of the statement. Then, use Living Shadow, and then Gem Draft a bit ways into the duration, and observe that the damage goes up. At this point, we have demonstrated that it also scales real time. Pets not benefiting from personal buffs is a somewhat common misunderstanding and can originate from many things. For example, Living Shadow does not benefit from your dark side, but then again, that is technically not a buff. The logic for the snapshotting misunderstanding often comes from the fact that most things you do snapshot on cast and summoning a pet logically would then snapshot too, right? The most reasonable counter to why that is not the case is that then you could, for instance, snapshot a gem draft on a Scholar's Ear summon and then just constantly have this boost, which would be a little strange. Number 8. At some point around Heavensward or Stormblood, the developers started making sure all future enemies were unspinnable. True or false? As a bit of a hint, a mob being spinnable means that you can halt its ability to attack you by running around it fast enough. This comes from the fact enemies have to be at least generally facing towards you to attack. False. Sometimes a very extremely general statement can be tripped up by just a single or even a few exceptions. The statement is meant to suggest that at a certain point in development, all new mobs added were made immune to this wacky trick of spinning the mobs to stop them from attacking. However, random mobs, even in Endwalker, are still susceptible to this trick, although admittedly it's not like you need it. Slightly more importantly, there are still boss fights where this trick can be impactful, as many Palace of the Dead floor bosses, for example, are susceptible to the trick. I guess it is worth noting that Palace of the Dead wouldn't be a relevant counterexample to the original statement, as it was added in Heavensward. However, it would also indicate that preventing the spinning of these enemies has not been deemed worth worrying about. On the other hand, past like A Realm Reborn's leveling experience, it does appear to be the case that most Duty Finder content bosses are pretty much unspinnable. Mostly. Number 9. Summoner's Physick scales with Mind because it has to be useful for Scholar, as it is the same Physick. True or false? False. Not only are these Physicks not considered the same spell, but the true reason Summoner's Physick still scales with Mind, as far as the story goes, is much, much sillier. First, you can demonstrate that these Physicks are distinctly different spells as far as the game is concerned. First, by observing that the Physick spell Scholar has is labeled as only usable by Scholar. Similarly, the one Summoner has is labeled as only available for Arcanist and Summoner. Additionally, if you want further proof, if you move either of the Physicks to a non-job specific hotbar, and then switch to the other job, you can observe that the Physick will be unusable. Now, supposedly, the real reason Summoner's Physick scales with Mind is simply because it did for so long, and at this point the development team mostly keeps it around like that as a silly reference to the old times. And finally, number 10. What does TENacity do exactly? A. Reduces damage taken. B. Increases damage and healing done and reduces damage taken. C. Increases damage done and healing received and reduces damage taken. D. Increases all damage done, but only increases healing done by weapon skills and spells. Also reduces damage taken. The correct answer, of course, is B. Yes, I did in fact let B be the correct answer twice. TENacity increases all damage and healing done and reduces damage taken. The damage reduction portion scales significantly faster than the output increases. A is a possible misconception that simply originates from the fact that TENacity increases damage output slower than Determination, so this kind of player simply does not care that it has other properties. C is a very common misunderstanding, as you could glean this interpretation from the TENacity tooltip itself, at least in English, as it is written in a somewhat confusing way. Additionally, it does make sense for a tank-specific stat to increase healing received rather than done, since increasing healing received would enable the tank to more easily heal themselves, but also would make healers have an easier time healing them too. The most accurate way to test this is to cast Paladin's Clemency on someone else, then add a bunch of TENacity through materia, and observe that the healing is increased as a result. Finally, D is simply smashing together the TENacity stat with a common misunderstanding of how Determination works. A common misunderstanding there is that the English tooltip, again, for it could be interpreted as only increasing healing magic, which refers back to the healing magic potency thing of Temperance, suggesting it would only increase spell healing. Assuming you wish to test this one too, you could test the healing of Warrior's Equilibrium, then add Determination and TENacity and see that the healing increases. So, how many of them did you already know the correct answer to beforehand? Did you guess any randomly based on intuition? Do you feel like some of them are actually wrong? Either way, be sure to let me know about it and any myths you might have encountered in the comments. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Twitch or Ko-Fi. Links in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, on release of Sandoria, one of the pieces of equipment for Ninja and Viper from the Alliance raid just so happened to, by mistake, give spell speed. If only Doton had actually scaled with spell speed, in which case this wouldn't be entirely useless. Although, let's be honest, it also wouldn't be very useful.